Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, July 19th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 43 days, the game against Michigan in 134 days. As we are counting down the days to Big Ten Media Days next week, we're also going to be counting down today the biggest games in the Big Ten this season. We're going to be doing that with our buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, as I was kind of going through this list, it was like, boy, there are some really, really big games, but it really, as you look through the list, I just put together the top seven. I feel like there's a pretty good gap between the top seven and, the next sort of level of games. But it's interesting that virtually all of them, there's only a couple of them that do not involve the new teams in the Big Ten. And I think that kind of underscores just how big those additions are going to be and how much that's really going to change the landscape of the Big Ten this year.
For sure. It pretties everything up, I think, quite a bit when you look at the Big Ten schedule, and there's much better inventory, more interesting things. Maybe it'll be less interesting in 4 years or 5 years when we've seen this for a couple of years and we've seen teams play each other. But right now you look all over the place, and it's not necessarily every week, but most weeks there's something new, there's something intriguing, and even just getting out of the East plays the East, the West plays the West, the same schedule rut. I mean, there's some differences and some newness there that makes this overall schedule really intriguing, but there are some pretty darn good games to talk about, Tom.
Well, let's start with the fact that the number 7 game here, this is the first one we're going to be talking about because it's sort of the last of the sort of top tier of games. Oh, by the way, it's a rematch of last year's national championship game, and that's number 7 on our list. That is Michigan traveling out to Washington on October 5th. Now, I think both teams are probably going to be taking a pretty significant step back, not expecting either one to be a legitimate national championship contender this year. But still, just to have those two teams who played for the national title last year and have them be, well, there's 6 games better than that this year, boy, that really kind of puts it all into perspective.
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest interest in this one will be that it is the rematch of the national championship game. I don't expect either of these teams to be back in the playoffs necessarily. The loser, certainly not, so you better win it. I think what's interesting is when we talk about Michigan's schedule, and we will talk about some other games, I don't necessarily view this as a loss, but it is very much a game that they could lose. So I think just the fact that there are more of those games, more of those toss-up games, I think is fun and more interesting. And if Michigan has hopes, they better not blow this one.
Yeah, they have 3 more on this list, and we're just talking Big Ten conference games. So their game against Texas, that is not on this list. So yeah, there are some real losable games for Michigan this year. They're probably not going to run the table again, but we will see. Next up, let's hit another Michigan game, Tony. Number 6 on our list, classic Rose Bowl matchup. This is one that you have seen in Pasadena on New Year's Day a whole bunch of times over the years. USC playing at Michigan. That is September 21st. That's going to be a really good welcome to the new Big Ten, because that you're not in Kansas anymore when that's a Big Ten conference game.
Yeah, and the last time these two teams played in the regular season was 1958. That was in Michigan. So it's been a long time, and we view these two teams as kind of rivals. They played in the Rose Bowl, I think, 7 times in the last 55 or so years. But they don't, it's been 2007 since the last time they played. It's been a while. And so I think it's going to be fantastic to watch these two uniforms on the same field. But this is another one where Michigan better be ready. And, can USC's defense be better than it has been? I think probably yes. Will it be? It should. But I want to see USC try to handle Michigan's physicality and Michigan try to handle USC's outside and inside speed.
Yeah, that's going to be a good one. That'll be a good sort of first taste of the really big new Big Ten. Next up, number 5, another USC game. This is Penn State going out west to USC, and this feels like this could be a real important one for Penn State because they are, you've seen them projected as potentially a college football playoff team, but generally, the third Big Ten team in the playoff maybe, and, 9 seed, 8 seed, 10 seed, somewhere in that range where this is a road game. You got to go all the way out west to USC. It's one that Penn State should win, but it also feels like this might be, outside of the Ohio State game, which is really going to be sort of their season-defining game, this might be second place for them in terms of just how close do they get to a potential Big Ten championship game berth, and just how close do they get to the top of the college football playoff field.
Yeah, and I think there's a question about Penn State's place in the Big Ten after this expansion, where we knew they were striving to get to Ohio State's level. They were at Michigan's level. Michigan obviously took things up a notch, but they can't afford to be passed by. And I think we all agree, like, Oregon is there now. You don't want USC to be in that mix with you as well. You want to keep the tiers as they are, but this is like screams a trap game for me. But then, Tom, the 3 games before this one for USC, let me read them to you. At Michigan, home against Wisconsin, and at Minnesota before they play Penn State. Are they going to be healthy enough at that point after 3 weeks of facing the run, 55 times, and then you got Penn State coming to town and doing the same thing? This might be a worn down USC defense by that point, and frankly, a worn down USC offense as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if the depth is quite there on that roster right now. They have not recruited as well as you sort of think of USC recruiting, and that's true, especially on the lines there. So that's definitely something I would circle as a potential concern there. They do luck out. They're going to Minnesota the first weekend of October, when it might be a little chilly, but will probably not be snowing sideways. Boy, the first USC visit to Minnesota in mid-November, or first visit to Camp Randall in mid-November, boy, that's going to be a rude awakening, I'm guessing, for the guys from Southern California. Number 4 now, Tony, Oregon visiting Michigan on November 2nd. This is the same day as the number 3 game on our list. This is going to be a monster weekend of Big Ten football. But Oregon going to Michigan, outside of the Ohio, this is Oregon's toughest road game, I would say, of the season, at least in conference play. And, if they get through Ohio State at home a few weeks earlier than this is probably the last thing standing between them and more or less having a spot in Indianapolis locked up.
Yeah. Do you remember the last time Oregon came to Michigan? I'm sure you do. It was, Tom, the Big Ten Network was just a couple of months old, maybe a month old by that point. Actually, only maybe a week old by that point.
A week old, yeah. This was the week after Appalachian State, right? And it didn't have 39-7 or something like that? 39-7.
I believe that was Dennis Dixon running all over the place, throwing all over the place against a shell-shocked Michigan defense. This one is, again, one where we would expect Oregon to win, but also this is an opportunity for Michigan to be like, no, we are still the Big Ten. We are still the leaders and best, if you will. And so I'm fascinated to see how this one goes, because it could go in a number of different directions. Like, Michigan should take a step back, but if they don't in this one, that's going to be a pretty good statement, regardless of what else has happened, regardless of what happens against Texas. Like, if they can do something to Michigan, that would be, or to Oregon, that would be impressive. I will say, the week before the Oregon game, Michigan State comes to town. Is that anything to be concerned about?
Is it anything to be concerned about? That's a fascinating question. We have seen Michigan State pull crazy upsets. This feels like a Michigan State team that is very down this year, and probably going to get things on the right track under Jonathan Smith, but probably not going to do it just yet. So that would normally be a very tough back-to-back for Michigan. I think this year's Michigan State might make that a little less of a challenge, but definitely something to keep an eye on. That same day, the same day as Oregon at Michigan, Ohio State travels to Penn State. We did find out this week officially that is not the whiteout game for Penn State. We have been talking about that for a few months now, since there was the report about the trade of weeks between the different broadcasters. And because for a bunch of various complicated reasons, and I'm not going to show my math here, we were speculating. We were pretty sure that meant that the Ohio State-Penn State game was not going to be a primetime NBC game, and that meant it was likely going to be either a big noon or a 3:30 kickoff. The fact that Penn State announced this week that it is not the whiteout game is pretty decent confirmation that that's true. So, it is either going to be the noon kick on Fox or the 3:30 kick on CBS, with the Oregon-Michigan game being the other one. I'm going to guess they're not going to want to put more Oregon and the West Coast audience on a 9 a.m. local kick time, so I will guess that will be the big noon kickoff game, but that's not official yet. That's just sort of reading tea leaves. But either way, this is another one, Tony, where Ohio State has a trip out to Oregon earlier. Then the weekend after Halloween, they go play in Penn State, and that is a place where Ohio State has won most of the time. They've only lost there in once in the last, 10, 12, 14 years, something like that. But it has generally not been real easy for them there. So this feels like another one that, if Penn State wins this, that's probably just about locking Penn State into the college football playoff unless something crazy happens. And if Ohio State wins, that's probably just about locking Ohio State into the college football playoff unless something crazy happens.
Yeah, I think the last time Ohio State lost there was the fluke in 2016 with the blocked kick, though I'm sure there are plenty of Penn State fans saying Ohio State has won plenty of flukes in that stadium as well. And so, maybe it's all evened out by now. I don't think so. But, I mean, this is one where if the game is at night, like how much does that change? And we've said it won't be. Like how much does that change the line? Is that 2.5 points in Ohio State's favor? That sort of thing. Like how much does that affect things playing at noon? And it's still a great environment whenever you play it. I think it's just different for the players, the visiting team when it's at night, and just the waiting, the anticipation. At least here, you get to the stadium pretty early. You go play your football game. You don't have to worry about anything else. There's not nearly as much build up. You're not thinking about it the entire time. You're just ready to go. And hey, it's just a noon game. Like it's not anything special other than the fact that it's a very good opponent, a very tough team to play. You don't make it more than you need to make it.
And even at a noon kick, that has been a challenging spot for Ohio State. 2022, they were in a dogfight midway through the fourth quarter on a noon kick at Penn State. So, that does not mean it's going to be easy. It just means it's maybe going to be slightly less brutally difficult than it could otherwise be. So we will see when that kickoff time ends up being, but I think you can safely mark yourself safe from Penn State primetime whiteout kickoff for at least this year. Now, Tony, there's 2 games left, and I'm going to do you the tremendous favor of deciding which one is the biggest game on the Big Ten Conference schedule this year, because you got Ohio State at Oregon on October 12th. You got Michigan at Ohio State on November 30th. And I know which one I'm expecting to have the highest rated teams, the highest ranked teams in the matchup, and that's Ohio State at Oregon. But also it feels like Ohio State and Oregon might play 2 to 3 times this year. And, it feels like the more things change, the more they might stay the same, and the season-defining game for Ohio State is maybe still the season-defining game that it has been for the last several decades.
Yeah, the game with the highest-rated teams will not be the game with the highest-rated ratings. I think the next game on the list is Ohio State at Oregon. It might be the biggest game of the season. Certainly one of the top 2 with Georgia and Texas. Those are like the 2 biggest games of the year. But you beat Oregon. Ohio State goes and beats Oregon. All people are going to be saying is, okay, go beat Michigan now. Prove it. It's, this is you're going to have to prove it. And if you don't, then what good was beating Oregon, that sort of thing. So I think the season is judged as a whole by what you do, but you got to put that button on it. And that button is the Michigan game. And that's the one that people will be waiting for. That's the biggest game in the Big Ten. Hey, Tom, the TV execs, they know which game they wanted, which was the biggest game of the year. They went with this one. They then, traded for the second biggest. If they thought it was the biggest, they would have taken it first. And I don't know what kind of trade capital you would need to then get Michigan and Ohio State after that. So, biggest game of the year, Michigan at Ohio State.
trading for the Ohio State Michigan game. That feels like a Herschel Walker trade where it's like, why doesn't NBC have any any games anymore for the next 7 seasons? It's like, well, remember that one time they had the Ohio State Michigan game? Yeah, that is definitely not going to be the case this year. The Ohio State Michigan game will be on Fox. We'll find out officially when the Ohio State Oregon game will be and where that will be televised. I'm guessing, just guessing, it's going to be NBC primetime. We will see. That's still TBD officially. But again, reading the tea leaves, that would be my guess, and then noon kickoff for Penn State. But we will find out together as all that stuff comes out. Hopefully in the coming weeks, they'll start laying out some of those other big games so everyone can start planning their falls. But man, it is going to be a fall full of really, really exciting football games. And we hope you can join us at BuckeyeHuddle.com to enjoy all of it. Tony, Kevin, and I, they're covering the team. We'll be at all those Ohio State games this fall. We have Mark covering recruiting. Got our whole team of X's and O's gurus there making you a smarter football fan. That's all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course, also at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week with a full week of content from Indianapolis. We can't wait. We'll talk to you then.